Hello, welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Thursday, January 9th, 2025. And on Thursdays, we tackle the issues of knowledge and science. At the outset, though, please forgive my disheveled look. I've been out shoveling snow for the last hour or two, literally tons of snow. We've had quite the storm here. But let's jump into today's topic, shall we? The title of today's talk is Data, Information, and Knowledge, an Introduction. Thought this would be a good place to start for the first in this particular vlog series. So, uh, data refer to any raw assemblage of facts or empirical evidence. It's basically our encounter with the real world, our experiential reality. We're awash in data, most of which we tend to ignore, or the data remain in the background. But more formally, we talk about data in the form of raw numbers or symbols of any kind, including texts and images. Okay? So then, depending on what we're doing, the real question is the extent to which we want to process the data. And do what? Turn the data into information. And to do that, of course, requires data analysis. I've spent decades, literally at the university level, teaching a variety of courses on research methods and statistics and a variety of different forms of data analysis. Even taught a couple of courses in data analysis at the graduate level in Mexico City in Spanish back in 1998. But we're all data analysts as human beings. We translate our everyday experiences, our awareness of empirical reality, and our exposure to raw data into more organized forms of information. That's absolutely essential. Otherwise, we couldn't live our lives. We couldn't make decisions. So information is produced then when the data are processed, organized, and interpreted. And that's crucial because you've probably heard the expression, oh, the facts speak for themselves. And I think that's one of the most popular, in my view, dangerous fallacies. The facts never speak for themselves. Have you ever heard a fact come to life and make a declarative statement? Me neither. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. If you're a basketball aficionado, you'll certainly recognize these two names, even if you're not. And even if you don't like basketball, I can still make the point here. The former basketball star, Michael Jordan, averaged 30.12 points per game during the regular season for his entire basketball or NBA career. That's the highest scoring average in league history. In fact, if he hadn't come back to play a couple of more years after he retired from Chicago, his career average would have been just about 31.5 points per game. So by that statistical metric, we can say that Jordan's the GOAT, the greatest of all time, or at least the greatest scorer in NBA history. But some of you might say, whoa, 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 wait, Mikowski. What about LeBron James? Jordan scored 32,292 points in his regular season career. But as of January 8th, 2025, James has scored 41,261 points, or almost 9,000 points more than Jordan. And he's still playing at age 40. LeBron's something of a freak of nature. You might say a special version of Laura Gilpin's two-headed calf. Check out the poem or look that up online. You'll see what I'm talking about. But while James has scored, as I say, about 9,000 points more than Jordan, he continues to build on that number as well. But his career scoring average is almost 3 points less, or just about 3 points less than Jordan's at 27.06 points per game. So who's the greatest? Who's the better scorer? Who's the the league's top scorer? It depends on how you look at the issue. It depends on the type of information you've gathered and what you value or what you consider to be the more important metric. So this table summarizes the comparison. Uh, and we could just let the facts speak for themselves, right? If you're asking who the greatest scorer of all time is, it's Jordan or James. Oh, right, the facts don't speak for themselves. So we have to speak for the facts. We have to make decisions about which facts to focus on. We're going to make sure our facts are right in the first place, right? That's a problem, or can be a problem. And then if we're basing our decision on the greatest scorers in NBA history on the points per game metric, well, then that'll give us one answer to the question. But if we base it on total points scored, that'll give us another answer. So, in terms of the points per game metric, well, indeed, Jordan's the top. He's still number one at 30.12 points per game, followed very closely by Wilt Chamberlain at 30.07 points per game. Then Luka Doncic at 28.65, a contemporary player, and another contemporary player, Joel Embiid, at 27.78. And then in fifth place, you'd find Elgin Baylor at 27.36, and LeBron James would actually be number seven by this particular measure. On the other hand, if you're talking about total career points, LeBron James ranks number one unequivocally, 41,261 points and counting. And he passed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who had been number one for quite a few years, who finished his career with 38,387 points. In third would be Moses Malone at 36,900, sorry, not Moses Malone, Karl Malone at 36,928 points. Then Kobe Bryant, the late great Kobe Bryant, at 33,643. And Michael Jordan would rank fifth at 32,292 points. So, first and foremost, it's crucial that we gather accurate data or facts. And if we have flawed data, we've already lost in some senses. So I presented to you the best data that we have available currently in comparing Michael Jordan and LeBron James on one particular, well, actually two specific measures of their scoring prowess. But if I'm wrong, I need to correct those mistakes, just as I was wrong, or I misspoke when I started to say Moses Malone instead of Karl Malone. So the first challenge is to get accurate data, accurate facts, as it were. And second, then we engage in data processing to turn that into information that summarizes the facts, identifies the possible trends and patterns, and so forth. Okay? And only then, in the third step, can we reliably interpret the information and speak for the facts. And based on our criteria for evaluating the facts, then we'll render our decisions, such as who we believe to be the greatest scorer in NBA history, based on certain facts that we think are more helpful and meaningful in answering that question. So, who's the greatest scorer in NBA history? Well, you tell me. What do the facts indicate? So we learn two important lessons. There are different ways to convert data into information, and there are different kinds of information on each subject matter. Okay? And unless we can agree on both the quality and the relevance of the information in question, then we're almost certainly destined to have a fruitless discussion or argument or talk past one another. So, for example, let me give you a specific an important issue: homicide rates. The data that we have on homicides in Canada and the United States are some of the best crime data that we have available, data on violence. It's not perfect because there are some instances where we can't correctly or don't know with 100% certainty that a particular incident was a homicide versus a suicide, for example. But generally, we are in more than 99% of the cases quite right in identifying what was a homicide and what wasn't. So we have really great data dating back to when we first started gathering data on homicides in both countries. So as a result, when we calculate the homicide rates in Canada and the U.S., we can do a pretty good job of both calculating the rates and comparing them directly. So in 2023, the homicide rate in Canada is measured at 1.9 homicides per 100,000 population, about just over 40 million Canadians. While in the United States, the homicide rate was about three times higher, 5.7 homicides per 100,000 population. Of course, the population in the United States is well over 330 million, so significantly higher. But it's not a question of the size of the populations. The question is, what are the rates per 100,000 population? By the way, the good news for the United States is that from 2022 to 2023, they saw a massive drop in the homicide rate from the previous year of almost 12%. And also, to put it in an even broader historical context, recognize that that figure is significantly lower than the rate of almost 10 per 100,000 back in 1991. So we can obviously track the trends over time as well. Okay, so human beings, then, as I've said, they're awash. We are awash in information. We're constantly processing and using the information for all kinds of purposes. And we access this through direct experience. We filter the data into our brain through the many devices and the platforms that are out there. And then we process the data and focus on particular patterns or trends that we consider to be most relevant. And voila, we have more information than we had previously. And if you have excellent and accurate information, then the challenge becomes how do you translate that information into something even more important and useful for human beings, i.e., knowledge? So I can give you information like a statistical equation, the Persian alphabet, the rules of basketball, the blueprint for a house, but that's not the same as knowledge. There's a lot of stuff that we know in terms of, we have a whole bunch of information. We know a lot about a subject matter, even if we don't necessarily consider ourselves to be really knowledgeable about the subject matter. That makes sense. So let me make it a little clear. So, for example, uh, pretty much everybody knows what will happen if you just let go of an object and it'll drop to the floor or the desk or what have you, right? So we have an understanding of this issue grounded in experience, observations, and we probably have some, vague understanding of the inner workings or the behind the scenes workings as to why the objects fall. And a shorthand term that we'll often use is gravity. So most people will simply say, yeah, it fell to the floor because of gravity. But pressed further, most folks can't really actually explain why that's the case or exactly what we mean by gravity. They have information, but limited knowledge. And I don't mean that as a slight, or I'm not saying that disparagingly. I'm just saying we have information, but we don't necessarily always have the deeper knowledge that goes along with that information. Okay? So information certainly can lead to knowledge, but it's not the same thing. So knowledge refers to our ability to understand, interpret, explain, and use the information effectively. In my view, or my understanding of the term, then knowledge essentially refers to the depth and breadth of understanding of a subject grounded in our experience. The experience might be from extensive reading, studying, research, and understanding, or even on the applied side through extensive practice and working in an area of interest. So, for example, we all have a lot of information about language, but especially our first language, our mother tongue. And so, in that sense, we're all quite knowledgeable, to varying degrees, some more so than others, in a particular language. I'm quite knowledgeable about the English language, its structure, its grammatical rules, vocabulary, and so on. And you probably are too. I can speak Spanish reasonably well. I mentioned teaching in Mexico City, but I'm definitely far less knowledgeable about the Spanish language. And while I know a lot of individual words and phrases in Farsi, I'm not really knowledgeable at all in Farsi. Again, not only do I know probably less than 200 words in total, but I don't know, for example, the Persian alphabet. I can't read a single word properly in Farsi. So again, I have some information, but relatively little knowledge of Farsi. I hope that makes sense. So most of us have areas, certainly at least one or two, or more, where we are reasonably or even quite knowledgeable. We might say that we're a good source of knowledge, and maybe in some cases, so knowledgeable as to be considered an expert? Give that some thought. What are your areas of expertise? Where are you genuinely quite knowledgeable? Okay. I'd encourage you to develop expertise in those areas where you most enjoy learning and be the person, if you will, that others can go to if they need help with your specialized kind of knowledge. Okay? And it's an important skill to be able to seek out experts, people who are knowledgeable in areas where you don't know, right? And the great thing, for example, about having five sons in my case is that I've got five other experts in all kinds of different areas, and they have different areas of expertise, each of them. But it's great because if I don't understand or if I don't know something, I can usually sort of diagnose, well, who's most likely to know the answer to this question? And I'll be able to go to them. And same thing like with my wife. She has knowledge, she's an expert in areas. And it's great because I can readily access her or ask her opinion or ask her advice on topics where she's has specialized expertise, and vice versa. She can sometimes come to me for advice and expertise and knowledge in the areas that I specialize in. Now, but you don't have to be an absolute expert. You just have to be reasonably knowledgeable or just have more good knowledge than I do. And I'm more than happy to go to you for your advice, to learn from you. But I want to caution that we should always be humble too in this regard and don't overstate our knowledge, right? Uh, I'm saying gently then that we should all try to understand the limits of our knowledge or where our knowledge ends on a given subject and what we just don't know or don't yet understand. I know a fair bit of math and I've taught statistics at the undergrad and grad level. And that said, I would still argue that my knowledge is still somewhat limited, certainly compared to somebody with a PhD in the subject matter. And so people who have studied and gotten degrees in mathematics and statistics definitely have more knowledge. They're definitely more knowledgeable than I am. I think I could still learn and develop further my knowledge and perhaps even become an expert in statistics. But alas, I am not. I chose to stop studying in that particular area once I reached a certain level of knowledge and competence. And indeed, let me provide a kind of amusing anecdote that describes or that helps illustrate this distinction between information and knowledge. So, my late father was not particularly well versed in mechanics and engineering or small engines, but he owned a riding lawnmower. And of course, through the course of using this over years and years, at some point the lawnmower broke down and he wasn't able to get it started one day. So he was trying to figure out what was going on, couldn't figure it out. So he called his neighbor, Dick Benson, who was an expert on engines, small engines, and this sort of thing. And so Benson came over and he did a series of diagnostic tests and he brought his spark plug tester and he was able to figure out exactly what the problem was. He determined that the points were old and worn and they needed to be replaced. But even better, he taught my father how to replace the points. And sure enough, once they did that, the riding mower fired right up. Great. My father had acquired knowledge and competence now in an area that he didn't know much about previously. So, uh, the next season, he went to start his lawnmower, and once again, there's a problem. It wouldn't start. But now, of course, he was smarter. He had some knowledge about how this small engine worked. So he deduced that again, this was kind of the same thing that happened the previous year, and he was trying to start the engine, but it wouldn't fire up. It wouldn't start. So he thought, okay, I must need to replace the points again. So he went out, bought a set of points, came back, knew how to replace them as he'd been taught, and then tried again to start the lawnmower. It still wouldn't start. So again, he had to call Dick Benson, and Obi-Wan Dick Benson came over to do his diagnostics, etc. But he was much quicker this time. So my dad explained to him what happened, what he'd done, and Benson, in all his wisdom, thought, huh. So he loosened this one particular cap on the lawnmower, and he figured out what the problem was. And he said to my dad, you might want to put some gasoline in the tank. A much simpler and quicker fix, indeed. And that was the problem. So you got to be careful with your knowledge and your expertise. Okay. And in this particular instance, of course, my dad was quite chagrined and embarrassed about the situation. And it's a great cautionary tale, then, right? Uh, let's not jump the gun in terms of what we know or think we know, and let's be humble with respect to the knowledge that we acquire. And of course, recognize that we can always still be wrong, even if we're the experts in an area. Okay. So I love the ready access to information and the internet these days, especially. And I like it as much as anyone. But we also have to not confuse gathering information from the internet with knowledge, and certainly not with expertise. And if someone says that, well, they did their own research, be a bit skeptical too. Not cynical, but skeptical. What did their research involve? What was their methodology? And indeed, most people are, quite frankly, not experts in research. Sure, they can gather lots of information, but that's not the same thing as being able to conduct good, reliable research. And the information that they gather might be quite selective or biased as well, which I'll talk about in another vlog. So, have they gathered a fair representation of the information that's available? Again, as I've stated, most people simply are not trained to conduct systematic research. That's in and of itself is an area of deep knowledge where one can develop expertise. And in fact, I think of everything that I've learned in getting a master's and then a PhD and then almost a second PhD, combined with 40 plus years of experience, I would suggest that perhaps my strongest area of expertise isn't really so much a specific subject matter within my field, although I think maybe violence, I might be considered an expert on violence. I love violence. Uh, but really, I'm mainly an expert in how to conduct highly rigorous, top notch scientific research. And relatedly, I'm good at evaluating the quality of the information generated by that research. And yet, I'll still be the first to say, I don't know the answer to that one, or we don't really have good research there, or I really haven't studied the issue, so I don't really know. So finally, though, understand that my expertise lies in doing and understanding the scientific research, but that's only one type of research and one type of knowledge. I'm not going to pretend to be a knowledge expert in other types of research with other methodologies that are non-scientific in nature or that are different. So if I want to understand knowledge systems of one or more religions, I'll turn to the experts in those fields, the people who've spent a lifetime studying, analyzing, interpreting, discussing, and drawing conclusions about the information contained in the sacred text or by, particularly well-known leaders, um, people who have been icons in certain religious, intellectual traditions, and so on. And they'll have much more knowledge about that type of information and how that type of knowledge, that is to say, religious knowledge, was generated. Same thing if you're interested in literature or literary text or great historical figures of literature. Again, I'll turn to a lot of other people who are experts in literary analysis, who've studied the literature of certain types or of certain authors. Okay. And again, they have their own methodologies for generating knowledge within their fields. And for that matter, we can talk to people who are knowledge keepers within indigenous communities who have a different set of sources and methodologies and oral traditions through which they've acquired their knowledge, right? Knowledge about nature, knowledge about, land and water, knowledge about their language and customs, and so on. So these indigenous elders are their own specialized knowledge keepers, if you will. Okay. And finally, there are other experts, obviously, in music and other art forms, and they have different bases upon which they've developed and studied their areas and become experts. And again, with certain methodologies, certain systematic ways of trying to acquire information within their fields. Okay, so when I'm talking about knowledge experts, there are many types of knowledge, and you can have many different types of expertise. Again, for our purposes, at least in this particular vlog series, we're going to be focusing mostly on scientific knowledge and scientific literacy. So I'll leave it there today, and until tomorrow, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts. And I hope to see you tomorrow.